Hello, everyone out there. Thanks for joining us here on another practical pet business discussion. Love doing these for you all. Thank you for those of you who are sharing your thoughts, your insights, and your questions. Lauren, today we've got a good one. And this is one I know is really deep for you and I, but we're going to respect everybody's time and keep it shorter. Pet business branding, whether it's your store, your service, your product, really critical, really critical. Where do you work with people on this and say, focus here, be aware of this?
So your image is everything when you are a product. And you're a product if you're a store or, or an actual product, whatever type of business you have, you're a product. And I see so much bad packaging, so much incomplete packaging, packaging that isn't, it's somebody in the company who this is what they want it to say and look like, but they don't consider how the consumer takes it in. So it's really important to understand not only your branding and your packaging, and you want to be open-minded to changing it once or twice if necessary. But every time you change it, it's expensive and you run a lot of risks. So if you can get it right the first time, that's great, and expand on it from there. But more importantly is making sure that it's recognizable, that there's a good image to it, that there's something that the minute people see it, they know who that is. It's the game show of where they pop up the icon and the contestant needs to say who that is and run down them. And so many of them you readily recognize. Other ones you're like, oh, I know who that is. And then other ones you're like, never seen that one. And then they tell you who it is, and you're like, huh, that just didn't make an impression. So I think that people need to understand, and this is super critical if you're going to do any type of private labeling, if you're a retailer, because I'm a big, big, big fan of private labeling, white labeling. But regardless, everything is going to be something you carry through, and consistency is important. Continuity is important. Color is important. Lack of color is important. So it's just across the board. It's everything that you have to create at the start.
Yeah, I love that you said lack of color is important. I want to make sure I point out, though, that white space, that ability to, because depending on the size of your product, and I see this quite often, I've been, frankly, guilty of it as well. Sometimes you're trying to jam so much onto it that it's lost. It's
Less is
just,
more. Yeah.
yeah, what a headache. Understanding and depending on your product or your service, there are things that you have to legally put there. That's got to be your first thought. What legally has to go there? What space is that taking up and what space is left? And then you build. I see so many folks do it the opposite. Like, oh, we've got this beautiful, and I'll be like, oh yeah, it's really pretty. Where are we putting the required analysis, the required notifications, the contradictions, all the rest of this? What we're like, whoa, what? Oh, yeah, we got to figure that out. And then
In
all of a sudden,
teeny
yeah,
tiny
all of a sudden
print.
that beautiful graphic work gets squeezed. And in the worst case, it's all a blur.
Mhm.
And that is something I really see all too often. And the font choices too that people.
Oh gosh, that's like, what were you thinking?
Yeah,
It's like this is not the place for calligraphy, or
yeah.
whatever. It's
Oh
like,
my
oh my
gosh,
gosh.
it just made me giddy giggle because yeah, sometimes creativity is not your friend. And you're right, man. I will see things and they'll be like, "Isn't this so cool?" And I'll be like, "I can't read that," and realize people are looking at that on a big screen and on their tiny little phone.
Mm-hmm.
Looks beautiful in that 50-inch screen, but on my cell phone, what you think it says and what I'm reading that it says, completely different.
Well, and
Um,
is your product international? Is it an
oh my
international
gosh,
product?
yeah,
Because now you've added more to your plate of internationally. That's even harder to
right,
understand or read or translate into something
yeah,
recognizable. Really
yeah,
difficult. I mean, you remember my
yeah,
logo was black and white. It was a an ink like drawing,
yeah.
and it was recognizable and simple. Name of the store, boom, that's it.
Well, and so I think everybody out there that knows me will know what I'm referring to. There's also the reality when you have hundreds of products and you only got so much in a color palette. And at a
Yes.
certain point, so you've got to think about those things really at the start. And, if you're not, you're just, and I love this, I wrote this down, changes are costly. Changes are costly, and expect that you are going to have to make changes
Hmm.
because the market's going to change, rules and regulations may change, your distributor from a vendor standpoint may change. There are going to be things that are going to force you to change. So the best thing that you can do is work to minimize the impact of those changes. Doing that up front, having a standard. I love what you said. That black and white logo that you had, that was going to translate no matter what. So the
Hmm.
changes you had to address became easier to address because we didn't have to worry about, well, does this have to be, does that have to be? Can it be read in this? Can it be, and all of these things that come at you, you're not going to catch every single one of them.
Right.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
Well,
So
it's interesting. In I love the psychology of watching the effect of color on product. So when you talk about treats and you talk about food in the pet world, um, it's really interesting to watch the psychological effect of certain colors on people. For example, a lot of people and a lot of companies use yellow if the product is chicken,
yeah,
and they use blue if it's turkey, and they use red if it's beef, right?
yeah,
So I would have customers who would come up to the counter, and I would know their animals, what they could or couldn't eat or what their preferences were or whatever. And I'd be like, "Are we trying something new today?" And they're like, "No, I don't think so." "Oh yeah, that's a new treat. I haven't tried that before." "Yes, but isn't your kid allergic to chicken?" "Yeah." "Okay, this is chicken." "Oh my gosh, I looked at the package and it was yellow, or it wasn't yellow, and I just assumed that it wasn't chicken."
yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, not every manufacturer has to follow. That isn't like some unwritten rule somewhere." But it happens a lot that that manufacturers will use those kinds of colors. And it's almost, after a while, I thought, really that should almost be a thing where manufacturers use yellow for chicken and blue for turkey and red for beef, or whatever the choices were, just from a selling standpoint, because it just automatically, the gravitation was towards that. So it's also the issue too of, if you have a particular color palette, is that going to translate in all forms of print and on
Yes.
on web and all of that?
Yeah.
Because it won't.
Yeah. No, and it's gotten more complicated with the more diversity in
Hmm.
where people are finding their products,
Right.
and so I think that has been a surprise, an adjustment to a lot of companies who, especially the smaller ones. I think the bigger companies, they just throw money at it, just being
Hmm.
honest. But those that have been successful, we've been doing it. I hear this quite often. We've been doing that way for the last 40, 50 years, Rob, and it's been success. Well, why'd you call me then? Like,
That's the worst excuse for anything.
it's like,
You hear, no
yeah,
matter the
but you didn't
industry,
call
you
me
hear
50
that.
years ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So but it is one of those things where when they're adjusting and they're now having to, well, we just had to, and hey, what's this tickety tockety thing and all that. And I just chuckle. I'm like, yeah, if you can't get the name right, you probably want to stay off the platform anyway for a while. Um, but there's this pressure and this move, and what's really interesting is sometimes it's the Wild West where you're promoting your product to, and very quickly that will change. And I think a lot of folks that rushed into that CBD world found that
Oh,
out very quickly.
yeah.
We had some states where stores were being shut down, fined, etc., while the administrators or the local municipality was coming in to make sure everything was being done right. Did it register this way? Did you this? Did you that? Is it on the back of the label? And I will tell you, as someone who had products in that space, those folks really did not know, because you could have right on down to the cities passing their ordinances, and you had to create separate labels. So to your point, the reality is, make it simple so that as things do change, because they're going to change, you can adapt quickly. And that was something that fortunately the companies that I was involved with had done. And what was even better was we had anticipated that would be a problem. And so we were ready to pivot very quickly and able to meet those where the competition couldn't. And we quickly became that de facto. Not only is it the best, but it's the only one we can sell with confidence.
Hmm.
And you know, look at those things, whether
Well,
you're a store,
brands do
whether
that
you're a
though.
vendor.
Brands do that now because not all ingredients are welcome in every state, even in pet food.
Right.
There's like California doesn't allow anything that has kangaroo in it.
Yeah.
So that becomes an issue. Or uh, I remember years ago that there was a particular brand of food that was really going through it because the acai berry wasn't approved in the state of Texas. No idea why, but for whatever reason, there are states that there's certain ingredients they don't want
Oh,
to see.
yeah. And I think you do know why.
I
You're
do
being
know
nice
why.
about it. Because you and I both know that is one of the harbingers of problems for a lot of,
Yeah,
not just the
yeah.
companies, but then the stores, and the vendors, because you want to do better, right? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. We want to do better. And so sometimes, and I love that you brought up that example. Um, it's that whole notion of like, well, wait, this state doesn't like it, or this, entity has a problem with it. And then you kind of pull back out and you're like, yeah, but around the world, this is recognized as beneficial for animals. Why aren't we recognizing that? And that's a whole like series. That's not
Because we're the US. Yeah.
yeah. That
So,
that's a whole series at a show.
but like
Show.
raw goat milk or raw milk products,
Yeah.
there's so much
Great.
pushback on that. And there's states where you just can't even sell raw goat milk.
Right.
And it's like, oh gosh, it becomes something you can never help a pet parent with in that particular state.
Yeah, I was gonna say in that state, you're out of luck, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So no, I love that you're saying that. The other thing too that I want to point out is because you and I have had this discussion. Marketing works because that's what it's designed to do.
Hmm.
Branding fails because while it should represent your brand, there is that disconnect sometimes between what you think something means and how others are perceiving it.
Right.
And I see that fail quite a bit. I'll have folks say to me, like, no, Rob, this is so great. And I'm like, I know, but I see these things mixed in here. And I'm looking at your ingredient list and the guaranteed analysis, and that's so much more prominent on your labeling and your packaging than it is in the actual product itself. So, so I think that's another, I mean, that's 12 different things
You
going.
can't find the ingredient list. That's my
Yeah.
favorite. When you're trying to look for something and you're like, oh my God, it's on the bottom, it's on the side, it's on the back, it's on the top. It's like, and what language is it in? And that's also, there's some products that there's 4 different languages on the back of the packaging, which is super annoying for some consumers. But
And then yet though, let me say this though, because I've experienced this in some municipalities, that's a requirement.
yeah, absolutely.
And so,
But
how do
it's
the folks handle that?
it's the perception of, everything is should be geared towards the consumer, but it's
Yeah.
difficult, and it's the perception of the consumer. One of the worst packaging flaws I've seen, and unfortunately, a favorite company that did it, which was the worst that I had seen. And alarmingly, I've seen subsequent companies do it as well. On the front of the bag, it says free of chicken, eggs, this, that, potatoes, legumes, all this other stuff. And so the consumer picking up the bag doesn't see the tiny little free of and sees chicken, eggs, legumes, potatoes, whatever it is that they might be trying to avoid. And they don't turn the bag over because they're not thoroughly reading it. It's so important, the colors and the verbiage and the font and the size that's utilized for what you're truly wanting to say that is important.
Yeah.
That there's companies that do this, and some of them don't do it well. And
Right.
then there's packaging that you look at and you're like, oh, damn, they
Yeah.
got it right.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, they got it right. I mean, I practically want to call them and go, so who'd you use? Just
Yeah.
because I'm interested in who you use, that you got it right. And I don't know, it's a big downfall and it's a big critical issue to something's success or failure. And it's the same thing whether you're a store or a product, or you're an influencer or whatever it is that you do. You're a pooper scooper person. Whatever it is
Sure.
you're doing, your logo, your brand, everything, your colors all need to be memorable, all need to get the point across and the highlights hit with as little distraction as possible.
Well, and I love that you brought that up because especially for the stores, you're challenged to incorporate your vision for your environment with the branding of the products you're bringing in. And I see that
Oh,
conflict sometimes where I'm just like, oh wow, I love, but something will stand out, and I'm like, and in the wrong way. And then others I walk into, and to your point, I'll walk into some when you get it right, and you're like, I could spend the whole day here, and I would feel so balanced. Wow, they did a really good job of incorporating not just their vision for the environment they want in their store, but they have pulled together the brands in such a way that it complemented it. And I just, I know they're successful not just because of that, but in part because they really put the time in and the effort to make it something special as opposed to taking the easy way out, just putting on a, cold hard
so
metal.
you probably don't remember this. It probably didn't jump out at you. But I just had this discussion with a mutual friend of ours the other day who's a distributor. And she knew that I did this. And we were talking about it because when manufacturers realized, and they were fine with it because, we were buying such a tremendous amount of product anyway and doing so well with it, that they got to a point where they would leave off what I would call the distraction. When you bring products in, whether they're toys or whatever they are, there's no rhyme or reason as to how much labeling, packaging a company puts on, right? They can do it any way
Right.
they want. It's their vision, that sort of thing. But I wasn't selling their brand. I carried their brand. I kept any data that was important for the consumer, but we took everything let's say it was t-shirts for animals, for dogs. We would take them out of the package. We would cut off the card, the hanging card, or we take them off the hangers or whatever. And I had my own tags made. This is why I love the white labeling. Had my own tags made. They were small, and they had the price sticker on it. They had the size on it. Logo was on the front. Everything was placed in exactly the same spot on the item. Same thing with our price tags, all of that, um, for like treats and that kind of thing. And there was uniformity. So you were never distracted. It was a white tag with our black logo on it and black print on the back that said, I think, our website, and a phone number. And everything was done that way. It didn't matter if it was beds or clothing or toys or collars or leashes or anything. And we got to a point, and I was very upfront with brands and told them there was a huge treat brand of chews that I was starting to look for white labeling. And the rep was sitting there, excused himself, came back in from being on the phone outside 20 minutes later and said, Vice President just gave approval for you to take all of our labeling off and put yours on if you'll stick with us. I was like, done,
Yeah.
because obviously they just wanted to sell more product. And I wanted to take away the distraction. And so when you came in, you could ask all kinds of questions and everything, but everything was uniform. And there wasn't a card this big, a tag this wide, things that blocked the view of the merchandising and that kind of thing. And it worked out great. It's fabulous. And I've taught a couple of retailers on how to do that. And it's nerve-wracking at first because you think in some way you're violating something and you're really not. You can be right up front with your manufacturer and just switch them all out. And it was beautiful. And all you focused on was, I mean, you knew where you were. So the logo on the tag, you already knew where you were. You looked at the item caught your eye, you were drawn to the item specifically and not the distraction of these obnoxious tags that some of these companies use.
Well, and I know you and I are going to have the white labeling
We
discussion
are.
because I've got a lot of different experiences with that, and so we'll certainly talk about that. But I do love what you're talking about in terms of keeping the aesthetic of the branding, keeping the intent of the branding throughout your space, throughout your products that represent you. And I think that that's something too when we see an expansion of pet products in places we never saw pet products before. I mean, there are very few types of stores I can walk into now that I don't find something for pets. It may be a small
I
section.
know, that's true.
Yeah, and I remember, gosh, years ago, I was broadcasting, um, and I remember this because I got to spend time with Joe Namath. But I was
Oh,
broadcasting.
that's cool.
Yeah, I was broadcasting from the show. And I'm just gonna say it because you guys could figure it out, but the National Hardware Show. And I remember when they contracted us and the network reached out to me and said, like, hey Rob, we need you to broadcast. I was like, the hardware store hardware show, really? It was huge.
Oh
I've
yeah.
been to unbelievably how big this was. It took up most of Vegas. It was just crazy. Um, but I was blown away because I was thinking, okay, I'm just some sideshow, whatever. And no, they had a whole vendor area for pet products, and it was amazing. And I thought that was like, wow, this world is really branching out, and it's just continued to where it's,
Yeah.
I don't know. And I share this the last little funny one of I literally, I'm a girl dad, went to a salon with them and was floored because there was a section for to bring your pet, and they had one specialist who would do the nails, who would do it, and I was just like, that is so incredible. And how like amazing is it that you girls go to this? I have to go with you on this one, and that's there. Now, of course, I know my daughters probably made sure I went when they were going to that one, but oh my gosh, the pet business side of things has really expanded out. But when you think about it, and when I thought about it, my initial reaction was, oh my God, I can't believe that's here. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, that is brilliant. It makes absolute sense. And who better, than someone that does that every day to really get into the deep intricacies of, okay, I get it. Made sense. Do I want to see them selling certain things? No, but okay, I got it. So the for me, I'm just gonna put my little last spin here on the packaging, the branding, the feel, the atmosphere you create, all comes back to that packaging, how you're branding yourself. And if you think about it, it's not just that's what represents you when you're not there to represent yourself, but that's what also carries on because that initial feeling, reaction, judgment, first impression lives on so much longer than most of us
Yeah.
want it. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Agreed.
Well, hey, folks, another great, practical pet business chat here. If you have questions, you want to share your thoughts. What are you all experiencing? You can do that. Send us an email at practicalpetchat@gmail.com. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. We know how many pressures you have, and we really appreciate you. We hope you're benefiting from this as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as, nor should it be construed as, professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment for your pets. Always seek the advice of a qualified veterinarian with any questions you may have regarding your pet's health or medical condition. Never disregard professional veterinary advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts and the guests of this podcast are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared during these episodes. Any reliance on the information provided is solely at your own risk. Copyright 2025 Practical Pet Chat, all rights reserved. Unauthorized duplication, distribution, or reproduction of any content from this podcast, including but not limited to audio, scripts, and show notes, is prohibited without prior written consent. The opinions and views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Practical Pet Chat.